This video is going to be about networking. There's been a lot of talk over on Gen X about black people and networking, and specifically black men and networking. And then some people wanted to make the point that all the other races are networking, but black people aren't. Well, I personally think that statement is a bit misleading. First of all, I'm not really convinced that there is a quote-unquote white network. Yes, there are white people who network, but most of the time it's because they have something in common with, or there's some kind of common thread running through them and the people they're networking with. And it's not just race. For example, Sergeant Willie Pete mentioned a scenario in one of his videos where like a white guy graduates from school and then the guy's father will call up one of his friends and say, "Hey, my son just graduated, can you give him a job?" And just like that, his friend will hook his son up with a job. Now, that is not the way that the majority of white people get their jobs. The majority of white people have to go out there and do interviews and bust their butt to find a job just like everybody else. When that white guy is calling up his friend to say, "Hey, give my son a job," he's probably calling up an old frat buddy, or somebody who came from the same hometown, or someone who graduated from the same business school, something like that. When you see white people networking, they didn't just pick some random white person out of the phone book or walk up to a random white person on the street and say, "I'm white, you're white, so let's network." Yes, they may all be white, but there's something outside of their whiteness that's pulling them together, making them network. And whatever that common thread is that they're networking around, any white person that doesn't share that common thread will also be excluded from the network. There is no massive white network that includes all whites and excludes everybody else. I think one thing that might be frustrating us unnecessarily when talking about this quote-unquote black network is that we're kind of overthinking it. Networking isn't hard. In fact, I think it comes natural if you have a reason to do it. Today's black people in this country have not found a reason to network. And here's what I mean. When I was in university, I had the opportunity to go over to Mexico to study abroad. My school, which was in Mississippi, partnered up with 3 other schools, one in Arizona, one in Oregon, and one in California, and we all went over to Mexico under one program. I was the only black girl and the only one from the quote-unquote South, and then there were 4 kids who were either Mexican or half Mexican, and the rest of the kids were white. Now, when we all got down to Mexico, there was no black, there was no white, there was no Mexican, there was no Southerner, there was no West Coast. There was just 15 American kids who stuck together because we were strangers in a foreign land. We did not have to force ourselves to network or support each other. It came natural. Now, I'm not saying that within the group of 15 that there weren't smaller sub-cliques, but in general, everybody was hanging out with everybody. I could go to any other person in the group and say, "Hey, you want to do this?" And 99% of the time they say, "Sure." Now, here's the thing. As tight as we were in Mexico, most of us have not spoken to each other since we left Mexico, except for the people who came from the same school. There was one girl I did keep in contact with, and we talk like about once a year. But other than that, I don't talk to those people. Now, we may have friended each other on Facebook or MySpace, and we may send an occasional, "Hey, how's everybody doing?" kind of email, but we don't have any extensive conversations anymore. The thing that was making us so tight is that we were Americans in a foreign land. Outside of that, we don't really have that much reason to keep in contact with each other. So we don't. Now, a lot of times people ask the question, well, how come foreigners can come over here and get ahead, but other people can't? Well, part of the reason, and I am stressing that this is just part of the reason, it's because of the phenomenon that I just described. If some Chinese people come over here, for example, that makes them strangers in a foreign land, so they're going to be tight with each other. But also, a lot of times people who come over from Asia, they'll have these really heavy accents, and that's going to make them getting a quote-unquote regular job a lot more difficult than the average person. Not that they come over here to get regular jobs anyway, they come over here to open businesses and go to school and stuff like that. But also, when they come over, even though, the government might make them prove that they have a certain amount of money, they still might not have enough money to open a business. And since they don't have an established credit line in the United States, then getting a loan right off the bat might not be a possibility. Well, they really don't need a bank loan because they have other Chinese people who are already here and already established who can invest in their business and help them get it off the ground. Okay, so why doesn't all this work for black people? Well, first, let me tell you one more story. I went to Subway with one of my Indian friends, and when we got there, we saw that there was another Indian guy working behind the counter. So immediately, my friend starts talking to this other guy and, asking him all sorts of questions. Do you speak Hindi? They said a few things in Hindi, but then they switched back over to English so as not to be rude. But anyway, my friend was asking him all sorts of questions, and he found out that he was here on some kind of a visa. and the guy was trying to figure out some kind of way to stay in the country, or actually he wanted to immigrate into a Western country like Canada or something. So then my friend just started giving him advice on what to do, and before it was all over, they ended up exchanging numbers. If they had been over in India, that scenario probably wouldn't have happened. Black people in this country don't have the stranger in a foreign land factor to help them gravitate toward each other. And actually there's factors repelling us from each other. Let's just go ahead and keep that real. One of them is like what Sergeant Willie Pete said. There are a lot of black people out there who like being tokens. They don't want other black people to make it where they made it or start working in the company where they make, because that's going to make them be less special. Also, if another black person starts working in the company that you work in, like it or not, the bad things that they do, or if they ever mess up, it's going to kind of reflect on you. Unfortunately, when it comes to black people, if a black person does something good, it's just that one black person. But if a black person does something bad, it's all black people. But anyway, getting back to the point of the video, another reason why networking doesn't happen for black people, and even black people who are doing well, is because a lot of black people who are doing well, they went to college, got a degree, graduated, and went to work at some company. Now, they may even work their way up in the company and get into a pretty high position, but they still might not be in the position to where if another black person calls them up and says, hey, my son just graduated from college, can you give him a job? They might be able to say, well, I'll talk to somebody and see what I can do, but they won't be in the position to say right then, okay, it's done. Tell your son to show up at 8 o'clock sharp on Monday. But like I said before, a lot of black people might be reluctant to do that, because again, if this kid comes in and fucks up, and you vouch for him, then that's going to reflect bad on you. That definitely will reflect bad on you because you vouched. In a situation like that, if you were the black person who worked in the company, there will be almost nothing for you to gain and everything for you to lose by doing that. So that's another problem we have. A lot of successful black people can talk to somebody for you, but they ain't got the power to say, okay, you're hired. Now, of course, there are some black people who do have that power, but we're talking about numbers here. Alright, moving along. The next problem I'm going to talk about, which is similar to what I just said, a lot of successful black people get these jobs that are not transferable, meaning you can't pass them on. Me and Pink Elephant had an exchange about this on my old account, my Gotta Be Kidding Me account. If you become an NBA player, for example, you can't pass that on to your son. If you become a doctor, as good as that is, you can't pass your practice on to your son unless he too becomes a doctor. He can't just pick up where you left off. He has to make his way up to med school, pass his test just like everybody else, and then he can take over your practice. But he may not be able to do that. Just because your father is a doctor doesn't mean it's going to be easy for you. You might flunk out. So either your father's practice is going to die with him, or he's going to have to pass it off to somebody else. But if you open a business, like for example a restaurant, you can pass that on to your son, no questions asked. He doesn't have to have a degree. All you have to do is teach him how to make the marinara sauce or whatever. A lot of these foreigners come over here and open businesses. They open gas stations, restaurants, black hair care places, stuff like that. When black people think of making it or being successful, we're thinking about, outside of being a ball player or celebrity or something, we're thinking about going to college, graduating, and getting a job somewhere. Well, it's going to be hard for us to network on other people's resources, or in other words, working for somebody else. It'll be easier to network if we're in decision-making positions. That way you can say, yes, I will invest in this business or in this person. Yes, I will hire this person, and you don't have to ask anybody about it. But anyway, that's the problem with getting a job somewhere. These jobs don't connect us to each other, they're not transferable, and it can be too risky to vouch for each other. Okay, and the last thing I want to cover as far as why black people don't network is that we don't have forces against us forcing us to work together. What I mean is we have all our rights now, so there's nothing forcing us to depend on each other. We're not forced to go to black schools, we're not forced to shop at black businesses, we can live pretty much anywhere we can afford to live. But if there were people or some force telling us that we couldn't do these things, then we would be forced to unite and depend on each other. Take illegal immigrants, for example, especially the Latino ones. Now, while they do have the stranger in a foreign land factor in their favor, they also are illegal, which means the law is against them, or I'll say not in their favor. So that forces them to band together. They don't have a problem with living 100 deep in a house. They share food and share resources, and that's how they're able to survive even if they're not getting paid very much. Back when I started in university, I wished I could find 10 or 12 people who wanted to get a house somewhere, and we could split the rent and all be paying like $8 a month. But that's a pipe dream for Americans. I don't care what race they are, because Americans need their space. Well, what if I want to bring my boyfriend over? Or what if we want to throw a party? Or what if, I want to walk around naked? Just a bunch of stupid stuff that could be worked around, but, whatever. That's America for you. I'm out of time. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.